Minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksiv, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, a Baha'i Perspective on Prophecy.
Eileen, how are you doing this?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
You are? Okay, wonderful. You've got a really warm glow about you, I think I've noticed.
Oh my gracious. Thank you.
We haven't really met in person. I was on our previous iteration of a live event. I think Wade gave me the night off. I don't know why I wasn't involved, but I'm excited to be here. And I think people or the audience who may have seen you before on this show, they know that you're a Baha'i, but that's what the show is about here, is a little bit of Baha'i reveal. And this is how I'm describing it, because I don't know much about the Baha'i faith, to tell you the truth. And I'm hoping that you can be very patient with me. And then hopefully for the newcomers that are tuning into, with watching the show. My burning question is, have you always been a Baha'i from day one?
No. I had quite a journey to reach that point. I was born into a family whose ancestors were Millerites. That is, Adventists who were had expected the return of Jesus in 1844, and then was still expecting it. And my mother was raised in Adventism. And then as an adult, she explored, studied her Bible, and she raised us in what was then the Universalist Church, which was on the liberal side of the Protestant spectrum. Today it's the Universalist Unitarian, but back then it was Universalist. And not much, shall we say, well, some things stuck. My mother was the Bible teacher for the high school class. And even though it's really miserable to be in a class that your mother is teaching, I learned a lot, and we talked a lot at home. But as an adult, I just walked away from the whole thing. But I was always a seeker in one way or another. I went through the agnostic route, and I got heavily involved in the New Age movement and wandered for several years there, and found out that it didn't offer what I was looking for. And then when I hit a really bad spot in my life, when the bottom fell out and the New Age stuff just wasn't working, then a friend introduced me to the Baha'i faith. I wouldn't have been ready for it before then, but when I was at ground zero, I was ready to listen and to read, and I did. And that was that. And I knew that if I went one way in my life and became a Baha'i, my life would be very different from if I didn't, and my life went that way. And it was a sort of scary decision in some ways, because once I commit, I commit. But I have to say that turning the way my life did has been wonderful.
Mm.
And I have never looked back.
Yeah, that's quite wonderful to describe that as a pivotal moment, and then making that commitment in such a way. I haven't really heard that described that way, but that's very interesting. You describe it as also working, and so there's something that on a daily, weekly, monthly sort of practice, you can feel that it's benefiting you. Maybe explain that a little bit.
Yes. Being raised in the Universalist Church, we were not into prayer. During the Sunday service, we had a congregational prayer, but that was it. And all through the New Age years, I never prayed. Well, as a Baha'i, we pray privately at least once a day. And that was one of the biggest obstacles, oddly enough. I didn't know how to pray. And I pondered about it, and how do you pray? Well, fortunately, I'll tell a humorous story. My favorite prayer is one word: help. And that always gets results. But seriously speaking, the Baha'i faith has hundreds, if not thousands, of prayers or meditational pieces. And once you choose one of those to focus on for your daily prayer, that's what got me started. And to this day, when I'm praying for situations or other people, I still tend to say, I pray for, as though God doesn't know that I'm praying. But that, I think, was the greatest gift, being forced to learn how to pray and moving through it and studying. I mean, the Baha'i writings are well over 100 volumes at this point, and they're not easy. But I have a studious mind, and I do study.
Mm. Good for you. What I never quite got that. What was the withhold the person's name when you're praying for them? You kind of hold that, suspend that. I'm curious about that.
I just simply say, I pray for, and then I name the person's name
Uh-huh.
and the situation. Sometimes, like healing after back surgery is one of my prayer projects today. And I trust that God knows who this person is and what the situation is. And somehow there will be a response to that prayer.
Interesting. Okay. And more than likely, there's several people praying for the person who has the injury, I would assume.
Oh, yes, in all probability. If we knew about the situation, we do.
Interesting. So, would you say that the Baha'i practice of prayer is, and I guess it's hard for you to say because you really didn't know how to pray, right? I mean, you
Correct.
went into the New Age, and
Yes.
I guess the question I was going to ask, and I don't know how you can intuit this, but you can't from experience because you haven't been a practicing person outside of the Baha'i faith. You haven't been like praying. You haven't been praying in a different form of faith, right? So, but how would you speculate that the power of the Baha'i faith, the prayer, is either stronger or better, or what? Is there anything that makes it unique that you would say?
I would very, very much hesitate to say that it's stronger or whatever. Everyone's prayers go to God. regardless of what religious tradition they come from. But with the Baha'i faith, it is the latest revelation from God. And much, much more was revealed in the Baha'i revelation, including prayers to meditate on than in previous dispensations. So I guess I have my little spot of prejudice there.
There's more wisdom for it to draw upon because of the
Yes,
published revelations and the literature of the
yes.
Baha'i faith, right?
Our prayer books, small prayer books, tend to be divided into categories: children, the departed, steadfastness, spiritual advancement, and so forth. And whatever situation is really bearing down on me at the moment, I can go to prayers specific, which is a tremendous comfort.
So in this particular person that you were praying for, you were focused more on the healing aspect of praying for somebody else's healing, I guess. Are there any points in the scripture that come to mind about healing that give you inspiration, or is it more of the actual prayer itself?
Okay, but when you say scripture, do you mean the Baha'i scriptures?
I'm actually referring more to just like the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Okay, Bible scriptures. Yeah. The Old Testament, which I call the Hebrew Bible, really doesn't give much in the way of prayers. They have the wisdom writings, and a lot of the experiences that people have are certainly inspiring. In the New Testament, Jesus only gave one prayer that we're aware of, which is the Lord's Prayer. And so I'm very much enthralled that I have these hundreds of Baha'i prayers revealed by Baha'u'llah at my fingertips in my books.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think we're going to get more into that as the show progresses. Thank you, Eileen, for that deep insight into prayer. I want to remind everybody who's tuned in and listening that engagement is key to the show. So what we are hoping that you will do is participate in tonight's conversation. Just like every week, come on back, enter some comments, tell us what you're thinking. The more honest and the better, I suppose, right? I mean, tell us what you're thinking. Tell us what you're feeling. Let's get a conversation going. That's in the comment section of the channel. But you can also follow us on at least, I think we have a Twitter account. Anyways, let's stay on YouTube for now. And then we've got a book that we're going to give away. Eileen, do you know of a good book that we could give away to a lucky listener?
Oh, I certainly do. It's one of my books.
Oh man, you said
Yes.
you know the
1844, Convergence in Prophecy.
Can I take credit for a little bit of prophecy to say that I was kind of like, I knew that your book was going to be announced on the show? I mean, my name's Daniel, right? So can I take a little bit of that?
I'll allow it.
Okay, all right.
Go for it.
Yeah, so okay, everybody stay tuned, and when we come back from this, we're going to bring Wade into the show. And remember, please be engaged. We love to hear your comments, and we'll talk to you soon.
In a world where beliefs are tested and mysteries unfold, one book takes you on a journey of prophecy, faith, and the unexpected. Followers of William Miller held their breath as they awaited the prophesied second coming of Jesus in 1844. But when the advent didn't unfold as expected, the great disappointment swept across the land. However, what if the story didn't end there? What if the Spirit of Christ did return in 1844 in the Middle East? Dive into the prophecies of Daniel, where the past and present converge to reveal a hidden truth. Embark on a captivating journey where the threads of history and belief intertwine in ways you could never imagine. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy, a meticulously researched and documented exploration, unfolds like a mystery, captivating and engaging. A must-read for those who seek to understand our world's intricate tapestry of religions and their surprising unity. Are you ready to challenge your perceptions and uncover the hidden truths of our times? Embark on a journey that speaks to the heart of today's challenges and offers hope from the most unexpected source. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy. Dare to explore. Dare to believe.
Hello, Wade.
Hey there, Eileen. It is so good to see you again. And thank you
you.
for joining the show tonight. So, just to reiterate what the minor prophet Daniel said just a moment ago, we will be giving away a copy of that book to a listener on the show tonight who provides a comment that you find the most intriguing, interesting, humorous, engaging, whatever. So, I can see we have quite a few people tuned in across our various channels, but not a lot of chat yet. So, post yourselves in the chat, say hello, ask your questions along the way, your comments. We look forward to engaging with you in the audience as well. So, Eileen, it was a pleasure hearing a little bit about your background there. I had actually forgotten that you come from a family, a lineage that was expecting Jesus to return in 1844. So, what was that like as a young person in that environment? How did that impact you personally from your earliest memories?
Well, not at all, because my mother worked her way out of it. She was a very intelligent and studious person. She read a lot, she studied the Bible, and she decided herself that she didn't believe what she was raised in. And she searched actually for a deeper meaning of Christianity and Jesus, but she raised us in a liberal Protestant church. So that's all I knew growing up.
Got it. So she actually perhaps, like, I'll share a little bit about my own experience in a minute here. She may have, with her eyes and ears, seen that Jesus had not in fact returned, and therefore the prophecies were false.
That's one way of putting it, yes.
What reality was telling her was that those prophecies were either misunderstood or were not really prophecies at all, and one had to interpret them spiritually.
Yes, she came to that conclusion.
This is really interesting, and I'm going to dig in here a little bit because, as you know, and as our listeners know, the ones who are regular, I'm also a Baha'i, but I come at this from a little bit of a different perspective than many Baha'is. So, I was raised, at least from the age of 11 on, in a group that also believed that Jesus was returning. So we believed in the prophecies. We had no doubt that these prophecies were sure. But we were also confronted with the reality that Jesus had, in fact, not returned. So how did we resolve that? Well, there were various ways in which you went in and you tried to be a little smarter than William Miller, right? You tried to figure out where William Miller had gotten something wrong, some math error. there's this intriguing scripture about this 100-year period, which you may know of. I think it's in Isaiah. And that could take you from 1844 to 1944 if you interpret it a certain way. And that's interesting because of World War II. And in fact, I believe there is some significance to that 100-year period. But that's not for tonight's show at all. Then you can get into other interpretations, 19-year time cycles, which called a Vahid in the Baha'i faith, but these 19-year time cycles had a significance to us, which is one entire revolution of the solar clock based on the lunar calendar and the solar and so on. So we had various ways at thinking, well, clearly there was a math error and he's coming imminently, because why? The signs were all around us. The signs of his coming were all around us. And so I knew about 1844 and I knew about the prophecies, but I never could quite figure it out. Because
Well, I'll help you.
Wonderful.
The 1844 prophecy was not wrong. William Miller and a lot of other people who also worked on the math did not make any mistakes. And Daniel did give 5 time-specific prophecies to the year that did all come true. And I guess I'll go into, well, first, about the nature of prophecy. I think one of the most reasonable questions that anyone can ask is, how can anyone know the future? Okay, well, what it says in the Baha'i writings is, there is, in the world of God, there is no past, present, or future. All of these are one. In other words, earth time, as we know it, is nothing like time in the worlds of God, or the time after we die.
Well, and isn't this consistent with Einstein's view of space-time, right? In other words, space-time is a self-contained system which is governed by the movement of bodies. And we had a person on the show a few weeks ago who is an agnostic, you might say, but he's also a determinist. And he said, nothing could possibly exist, and we can't even conceive of anything outside of time and space. Well, believers in a divine creator can in fact easily believe in a being that exists outside time and space. So with the application of Einstein's theories, which he proved through observation and through science, within that space-time, we have time. But if you can conceive of something outside of that, it's not bound by any of the laws of time as we perceive them. So modern science and the Baha'i writings are consistent in that regard.
Everybody experiences divine time, the laws of time outside of Earth, when you go to sleep and dream. Whether you remember your dreams or not, the body sleeps, the soul flies free, and sometimes it goes into these worlds of God. And sometimes we'll come back remembering, oh, something's going to happen, but it might not happen for 5 weeks, 5 years, 10 years, who knows? We were outside of our concept of time. And
isn't it interesting, because in the Bible, what is it that is said about those who are dead?
they
are sleeping.
spiritually dead.
Well, but the Bible refers, Paul says, those who have fallen asleep, and he means those who have died.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Well, I believe the Baha'i faith teaches you cannot kill a human soul. Human soul is energy. It's created by God. It's associated with the body. The body dies. The soul moves on. Whether a person believes it or not, it's going to happen. That's one of the rules of the universe. You die and you go, I suspect, to the level of consciousness where you belong.
So I think I got you a little off track, though. You were explaining this in the context of defining prophecy, or
Yes.
what do we mean when we say prophecy?
Yes. So it's important to understand that God is not bound by time, space in our world, and neither are his prophets, the manifestations of God, and neither were the Hebrew prophets, which were not manifestations of God.
So just to make it, to break it down for an audience that is living in the technology iPhone world, we can conceive of this also, because any one of us has had the experience of somebody who says, "Oh, I've seen this movie. This guy is going to do blah blah blah," and we're like, "Shut up! Do not spoil the movie," right? Because they've seen the end already, and it's just repeating itself. So a being that exists outside of time and space is just like that. All of human history is like that movie. And but God in his wisdom has made it somewhat inscrutable, that for those who are diligent seekers, you said you've always been a seeker, or that you have been on the path of a seeker for many years. Knock and it shall be opened, seek and you shall find. So the diligent seekers can penetrate these difficult prophecies, and William Miller was apparently one such gentleman.
I have tremendous respect for William Miller. He was a very humble man. He never claimed to be anything except a Bible scholar. He was completely honest, truthful. He was a very boring speaker. He gave talks that lasted 2 hours, ungrammatically. But people loved to listen to him because he knew his Bible. He had studied it, every verse along the way from beginning to end. And even though nothing happened in 1844, he didn't lose his faith. He was disfellowshipped from his own Baptist church, but he retained his integrity. He was never a quote unquote leader. The name of the movement, his name was given to it because he was the first to go public and speak about it, but a couple hundred other preachers also joined, and it was quite a movement. Now, the reason why so much belief was put into this prophecy from Daniel about 1844, which was his second prophecy, was because his first prophecy had come absolutely true. And if I can manage a little bit of technology, I'm going to bring up the first slide. Can you see it?
There it is.
There it is. Okay, his very first prophecy is called the 77s. The 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and a prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Okay, quick translation. He's being told that another prophet of God is coming. Now, do the math and remember that in biblical prophecy, a day equals a year. And there are two verses in the Bible that state this, and as well as the Baha'i writings do also state that this is true. So 77s, a 7 is a week. If you multiply 70 times 7, you get 490 years. Well, 490 years from when? Daniel used the date 457 BC, which was the year that the Persian king Artaxerxes I issued the command, the permission that Jerusalem be rebuilt, especially the temple. And the Baha'i writings also state that using this year, 457, is correct. So you subtract 457 from 490 years, and you get 33 AD. And that is when Jesus was crucified. Well, that worked. That came true, and Christians realized it. Therefore, when it came to Daniel's second prophecy.
So let me jump in here for a second.
Yes.
And ask, so was that prophecy not really fully understood prior to William Miller? Had people not done that math to understand that that was speaking about Jesus? Because I would think that that would have been a prophecy that was known and understood even before William Miller's time.
I don't know the answer to that. Actually, the expectation of the second coming ebbed and flowed throughout a couple thousand years for various reasons. And for instance, the turn of the 1,000-year millennium was a big time for expectation. But people were looking to Matthew 24. They were not looking to this next prophecy of Daniel, which I'll show you. Okay, and this is the 2,300 days. Now, actually, what precedes this is a horrific vision that Daniel had. And he was standing, in his vision, he was standing on a canal that overlooked the Persian province of Elam. And he saw a horrific scene of a goat and a ram and horns and all sorts of action, which we can't go into. And he was quite horrified. And he asked someone who was in his vision, "What in the world does that mean?" And I am paraphrasing there, of course. He, a holy one, said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. Understand that the vision concerns the time of the end." Okay. Again, using the starting point of 457 BC minus 2,300 solar years, and you get the 1844. And Daniel was told, "The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future."
So, so that is the primary prophecy that William Miller used to get
Yes,
to 1844.
yes. And to the best of my knowledge, from what I've read, no one else really zeroed in on it. And I suspect that William Miller was chosen. I use the word chosen loosely, but I think he made a very valuable contribution with his belief in the second coming of Jesus. He was in 1844. He was not wrong. It did happen. According to Baha'i belief, the Christ spirit came in 1844 with the first prophet of the Baha'i faith, the Bab.
So, but before we get into that, a few minutes ago, I pulled from behind me a copy of your book,
Aha.
and which I've obviously read, and I love this book. But it says convergence in prophecy for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith. And that's one of the fascinating aspects of this. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break. But when we come back, we're going to take a question from the audience about prophecy generally, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Islam and the Islamic connection here. And so I want to thank you for being here, Eileen, and everyone. I think you must be spellbound. We've got quite a few listeners on the various channels. Only a couple of comments. We'll look at one of those when we come back. But first, this word from our sponsor, Something or Other Publishing and Royal Falcon Press.
In a world increasingly disoriented and lacking spiritual values, many are turning to religion as a source of inspiration and comfort. Each person chooses their individual path, and if there is one thing we are known for, it's providing a positive platform for diverse points of view, to provide each of us the opportunity to discern truth for ourselves. Something or Other Publishing is proud to announce the creation of Royal Falcon Press imprint, to feature the unparalleled talent of multiple writers who will bring uplifting and thought-provoking contributions to the body of religious literature, offering current spiritual insights and practical solutions to the challenges we face. Let's grow together as one of the most substantial spiritual communities on the internet. Register and explore a new way to achieve universal wisdom and reinforce your faith with all the surprises Royal Falcon Press has in store for you.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade France, and I'm here with Eileen Maddocks, who has actually written 3 books, is in the process of publishing her 4th. And tonight we're talking about 1844 Convergence in Prophecy. I'd like to do a quick little recap. Eileen has just outlined 2 of William Miller's prophecies from the book of Daniel, one of which takes us to 1844. We're going to dive a little deeper into that in a moment. But we just played that ad about Royal Falcon Press because it seeks to bring in religious perspectives from a variety of sources and bring them together in a unique way. Now, I personally have been involved in interfaith activities at a local level here. I was in something called the South Central Clergy Council of South Central Wisconsin, which was then changed to the Multi-Faith Coalition of South Central Wisconsin. And there are other initiatives. They often become politicized, right? They often, grab a hold of some social issue and maybe begin to interpret it from a particular perspective. What we're trying to do through the Royal Falcon Press is very different from that. And I want to use an example. It's sometimes easier for people with different religious persuasions to get involved in a social issue than it in fact is for them to do something that Eileen talked about in the intro to the show that was difficult for her initially, which is to pray. So when I was a member of that group, I remember advocating that we would pray at the beginning of every meeting. And it was something we weren't doing, which you might think is strange. But one of the reasons we weren't doing it is that those different religions had different forms of prayer, right? Christians would tend to pray in the name of Jesus, which would make Jews uncomfortable. and other different variations of prayer being deeply personal. And so to come together and pray together was harder than getting all involved in some social action to share that deep religious experience together when it was personal and intimate, right? It's more of a challenge. And I found that very interesting when I was working in interfaith circles. And so, Eileen, you actually tackle this issue here in the Convergence in Prophecy, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith. And let's talk for a moment about Islam. What does Islam have to do with 1844?
Well, that very same year, 1844, Shia Islam was expecting the return of the Qaim, or the 12th.
And for the uninitiated, you mentioned Shia Islam. What is that versus Islam?
Okay, there are two major branches of Islam. Okay, wait.
Sunni?
What?
Sunni Islam?
Yes. Sunni is by far the largest branch. They do not pay any attention to 1844. Shia Islam was the branch that broke off to follow Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, and the 12 subsequent heads of the faith, called caliphs. And the last one, supposedly, the line ran out. The last one disappeared in 874. And Shia Islam had a strong tradition that he would return in 1844, which was, so there was expectation going on both sides of the ocean. And I do go into that.
Well, and the Baha'i writings explain many of these cryptic verses. So one of which is the deadly wound, right? Now, is that not referring from the Baha'i perspective to that split between the Sunni and Shia sects of Islam, right?
Yes.
And so for I just throw that out there for scholars and students of the Bible. It would behoove you, if you're serious, to explore these alternate answers, because if you, like me, spent decades trying to figure it out, decades trying to figure out, where did William Miller go wrong? How did he go wrong? Christ surely must have returned by now. We have a state of Israel. Either it is or isn't the Israel of God, right? Either it is or isn't the promised return of the holy people to the Holy Land. And, there are answers to that may or may not satisfy you, but if you've been searching and looking and trying to put this puzzle together, there are some possible puzzle pieces that may fit. That's why I throw out that little bit about the deadly wound. But back to Islam, and there's something about the year 1260.
Yes. All right.
Is that a separate prophecy, a different prophecy of Daniel, or how does that fit in?
It's his third prophecy. Let's go for it. Okay. Now, actually, this is the very, very same prophecy. Before, it was the 1260. Here, it's called a time, times, and half a time. Okay. In biblical counting, a time is 1 year. Times is 2 years. And half a time is half a year. And Daniel said, and you need every listeners tonight, you all need to go to your Bible and read the 10th, 11th, 12th chapters of Daniel for yourself, because there's quite an introduction to these prophecies that I don't have the time to get into tonight, but they are there in 1844, and especially in my trilogy, The Coming of the Glory. I go into this, especially in the third volume, extensively. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. That sounds pretty bad. It will be for a time, times, and half a time. That's the length of time of the abomination that causes desolation. Okay.
And this is also, is this not also something known as the times of the Gentiles?
I don't think so. No, I think that's something different. But you see, we have 1 year, 360, 720, which is 2 years, and 180, which is half a year, lunar years. Lunar years equals 1,260. Add to 622 AD, which was when Muhammad declared himself a prophet of God, and you get 1844. Now, don't try to do lunar years at home. You have to have a chart, a conversion chart to do this. And this was totally overlooked by Christians. And at the end, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the end of the time of the end. Now, what is so, to me, really striking about this third prophecy is here, Daniel is recognizing the coming of Muhammad and Islam. He gave the very same prophecy twice, once in Western time, Gregorian or whatever they used. It wouldn't have been Gregorian, but before that. And one by the Islamic calendar. Now, the Islamic calendar started in 622 AD. And that translates to year 1 AH. I take that back. It wasn't his declaration. It was the year of the Hijra when he moved from Mecca to Medina. But at any rate, it's extremely important to understand that this prophecy is given by the Islamic calendar also, which uses lunar years.
And Eileen, I really like that you highlighted that statement. I can actually move my, nope, that didn't do it. Sorry. I can't quite see the verse there because my picture is hiding it. At the very end, the times of the end. Daniel, what verse is that from? Go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed.
Yes, until the time of the end.
What's the source there, Daniel? What?
Okay, until the time of the end. And that's from Daniel 12:9.
Yep, Daniel 12:9. Okay, so
yes.
I'm really glad you quoted Daniel 12:9 there, because there are, critics would say, well, you're just moving things around to make them fit, right? You're just finding a way in which, if you twist it enough different ways, you'll find a match, right?
Well,
but right there, it's included that, look, this will not be understood until the time of the end. So in the distant future, and one of the reasons for that understanding is somebody who's finally willing to take the Quran and the Bible, take the teachings of Muhammad, the teachings of Moses, the teachings of the New Testament, the writings of Daniel, and to look at all these in a sense as being equal and to put them together versus casting one or the other out into outer darkness and not being willing to look at it, not being willing to see how this overlay is the reveal. So what I mentioned earlier about the prophecies being clear, because God sits outside of time and space and can write history in advance. My definition of prophecy is simply history written in advance, right? That's all it is. It's history written in advance, but it's written in the language and the concepts of a people that exists thousands of years before it happens. And therefore it's cryptic, but it's made even more cryptic with intent. Students of the Bible know that Jesus did not speak in parables to make the meaning clearer. He spoke in parables to hide the meaning. And this is what God did, in that he put a piece of it. The Bible talks about here a little, there a little. Bible students look for, here a little, here, there a little in various parts of the Bible, but God even put some of it into Islam. He put some of it into Buddhism, right? He put some of it into the teachings of Zoroaster, because he can do that to prove who he is. And of course, it'll never be proof enough for the doubter. But for the believer, there's a lifetime of study and awe.
Well, I would say for the open-minded person, sometimes I think it's better not to go in as a believer, because then you're looking for certain things. But to simply be open-minded and read these books, read the Bible, for heaven's sake, read an annotated version of the Quran. And I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you,
before you do, I want to go ahead and show this quote.
Okay.
That we've been waiting to show from Flawed. How do you reconcile prophecies and free will?
Yes.
If we say it's history written in advance, then where does free will come in? They seem like they would be in contradiction.
Okay, I'm going to answer this question from the bottom up. The bottom is me and a lot of people. We have a dream which tells us, hey, we're going to get sick pretty soon. That's a prophecy coming from somewhere. We do have the free will to immediately pay attention to any symptoms of illness and to do what's medically necessary. We may have a dream telling us, be careful in your car with your driving. It's not what it used to be. Be careful. Oh, I've had one of those. Comes with the age. I do have free will to become a more careful driver. Now, where did those prophecies come from? I don't know. I was out there floating around in my sleep. They came from somewhere. At the other end of the spectrum, let's say when God sends one of his prophets, who incidentally were created at the time of creation of the universe, that's in the Baha'i writings, and so they have been around a long time. And when a prophet of God says this is going to happen, then all the free will in the world is not going to change that. When Daniel received the Holy Spirit with these 5 prophecies, 3 of which we have examined, no one's free will was going to change the year 1844. That was set in stone. that was part of God's major plan. And then I hope that answers the question.
I think it does to a degree. I'm going to add my own little bit to that.
Yes.
And that is that in between the bottom and the top, as you called it, is the aggregate of individuals, right? So your example was you have the free will to have a premonition, let's call it, and make changes that could alter that outcome. At an aggregate level for society,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to alter the outcome for society. So I like to use the analogy, and it's an imperfect one. It breaks down, but to a degree, it's helpful, in my opinion. If you were in Nazi Germany, there was no way you were going to topple Hitler, no matter what. But that didn't stop you from choosing whether or not to save a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
So you have free will as an individual. But just as is the case in physics and creation, again, my analogy, at the quantum level, there is this indeterminate nature. For those who know about Schrodinger's cat, the cat is both alive and dead, or it might be neither alive and dead. And this is a conundrum, and yet physicists show that this is in fact real, and that until you observe it, the wave function doesn't collapse, and you can't know. This to me is an indication of how God deals with us. He chooses not to know what choice you're going to make as an individual, but he can see through the arc of human experience and humanity as a whole, and the nature that we have and the choices that we tend to make, and the ways in which we influence each other, and the ways in which infections spread.
Mm-hmm.
We had a recent experience in that with the pandemic and what we did or didn't do right about dealing with that. At an aggregate level, those prophecies are sure, and there is nothing that's going to change the overall outcome. But what each individual does in that mess
Yes, exactly.
is still a matter of free will and choice.
Exactly.
So with that, we're gonna quickly go to a break, and I know this announces that we will go overtime. I hope you're okay with that, Eileen. I know it's a little later where you are.
The last 2 slides are very quick, and then we have a lot of questions to address.
We've got to get to one more quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Discover the world's religious traditions like never before with Ocean 2.0 Reader. Our custom ebook reader is designed for exploration and study with an immersive audio integrated reading experience and powerful research tools available on all platforms including web, Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, and iOS. Experience the benefits of immersive reading by combining ear and eye with improved comprehension and vocabulary acquisition. Our interfaith library features books from various religions, so you can have access to a wealth of knowledge. Try Ocean 2.0 Reader today and elevate your reading experience.
Hello again.
Back to you, Eileen. Take us home.
All right. Okay, these last two. What's very interesting is the last chapter of Daniel is chapter 12. His third prophecy ends on 12:9, and then 12:10 is a prophecy, 12:11 is a prophecy, and 12:12 wraps it up. So here we go. Okay, the 1,290 days, and no way could anyone have foreseen what this meant until it happened. From the day that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. So you take the Islamic year here we are again in the Islamic calendar, 613. That was the date Muhammad declared his station as a prophet of God. I was wrong previously. 613 plus 1,200 lunar years, where in the Islamic calendar equals 1863. Well, in 1863, Baha'u'llah declared his station as a prophet of God. And then moving on to the last one. The 1,335 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Daniel 12:12. Okay, now we're going to work with, now this gets complicated. We're going to work with a start point from Islamic history, 628, and we're going to add 1,335 solar years, and we get 1963. Okay, what happened in 628? Muhammad, who was then living in Medina, signed a treaty with Mecca, his long-term enemy. They came to terms and they signed a treaty. And this gave Muhammad secular recognition as well as religious recognition, and really recognized the Islamic faith. In 1963, the first Universal House of Justice was established. In the Baha'i faith, we do things organically, and our internal structure starts at the local level with local spiritual assemblies, to the national level, national spiritual assemblies, and finally to the one global ruling body, the first Universal House of Justice. And there had to be a certain number of national assemblies to support the first Universal House of Justice. And that happened in 1963. And poor Daniel, again, he was so confused. And bless his heart. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. And he certainly did earn an allotted inheritance. And what's really interesting here is how the Quran with Islamic history is entwined with the years that are so important to Baha'i history. And it's important to remember that just as Jesus came out of a Jewish background or milieu, Baha'u'llah came out of an Islamic milieu. And we have a lot of questions here. Gee, which one would you like to take?
We've got this one from Fuad weighing back in about solar years and lunar years. You had just showcased these different prophecies. Some are interpreted using lunar and some using solar years.
Mm-hmm.
What is your thought on that?
I think God is extremely clever. In fact, there's a very funny verse in the Quran that says God is the greatest of schemers. And I think the way the solar years were used here and the lunar years were used there, and then they were entwined, there was a reason for it. It was in God's wisdom to pull the Islamic faith into these Judaic prophecies.
Well, the Jewish year was a lunar year as well.
Yes. Yes, they use the lunar year.
Right. So it would be
Lunar
natural.
calendar.
It would be natural to look at these prophecies through lunar years. So, I mean, this question might even be coming from that perspective, so we're using lunar years because the Jewish years were lunar and Jesus was a Jew and the Islamic years. So why look at solar years at all?
Well, for modern man, for the Western man, these prophecies were for everybody, East and West. That's the quickest answer I can come up with.
We've got a comment here as well. I think this isn't quite right because the lunar year, there's different ways in which, well, no, this is actually correct, right? So what happens though is with the lunar cycle. So thank you, Big Hammer. This is essentially correct. What happens though is the lunar calendar gets out of sync with the seasons. This is why the Jews have to intersperse every so often an additional month. And I'm not sure how this happens in Islam. Maybe they don't care so much. Maybe it's not tied to the harvest cycle. I haven't researched that. I know in the Baha'i calendar, which is different, you have these extra days as well. So this issue of the calendar is a fascinating one. And I think it ties into this whole aspect of the fact that these prophecies were written thousands of years in advance, and yet there is free will. And as man has studied creation, and as I say, learned to read the greatest book of Revelation, which is the creation itself, as we're beginning to learn how to read the book of creation, we're coming up with different ways to understand it. So the adoption of a solar calendar is just a different way to interpret time
Exactly.
and space, in sync with the seasons. The Jews had one way of doing it using the moon, and then they added this calendar, but there are different ways to do it from an earth-centric perspective.
Exactly. And so God covered them all, or both.
Wonderful. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and I know you're just scratching the surface. We're going to have actually another Baha'i author, Jay Tyson, on in a few weeks to pick up this theme and add his perspective as we continue this process of unpacking religion, unpacking the holy writings, and asking the question, what is the role of religion in society? We didn't so much get into what the meaning or the impact of this is. So let's spend a minute on that. Why did Jesus need to return? Why did Muhammad need to come? For that matter, why did Jesus need to come? Well, Christians would say, well, Jesus had certain things he had to fulfill in the divine plan of God. Certainly that he had to bring his own sacrifice in fulfillment of the Passover lamb and to be slain for the sins of mankind. And to, as the Baha'i writings put it, breathe fresh life into all of creation. The Baha'i writings explain that Jesus did this. But why Muhammad? Why the Bab, which we didn't really even talk about that much? Why Baha'u'llah?
Well, it says in the writings that even though we focus on the Abrahamic prophets, actually God has sent prophets of God to all the peoples of the world at one time or another. And memories of those appearances are carried alive through legends, racial memories. So it's not at all unusual that Muhammad came. Also, these prophets of God, and there have been many, 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 many of them. We haven't mentioned the ones in the East. They tend to come when they're most needed, when society is at rock bottom.
Well, and speaking of the calendar and the seasons and how it gets out of sync, there's this analogy, right, of the divine springtime and then
Yes.
a spiritual winter, right? And in the winter,
Yes.
things get dark and it gets cold and things die, and this rebirth is needed. And that as humanity strays from the intent of the teachings of the manifestation, as it becomes encoded in rigid dogma and in misunderstanding. And as Jesus said, one of my favorite quotes, when he talked about the Pharisees, he said, "You wash your hands with a fist." And what that meant was they had to wash their hands for show in front of the people. And because this ceremonial washing was done so frequently, they had a way of creating a little fist, and they would pour water into the top so that water would go down inside the hand and around the hand. So this ceremonial washing, they could display how they had so perfected the art of washing of the hands, this little rule, this little law. They could do it for display, and they used it as a weapon to exalt themselves and to show themselves as morally superior to the people, because
Mhm.
they had found a better way to wash their hands, of all things. And Jesus said, "You wash your hands with a fist," symbolizing that imagery of you use it to oppose, you use it to dominate. And that's what happens when we take those holy writings and create a religion around them that becomes enshrined in dogma and this
Mhm.
attempt at establishing moral superiority.
Mhm.
I love this comment here from Big Hammer, who said, "I think religion is to teach people decent ways to treat their fellow humans." And indeed, isn't it all about, loving your brother and being your brother's keeper, going way back to Genesis, the first
Right.
two human beings, Cain and Abel, and Cain's response,
Absolutely.
"Am I my brother's keeper?"
Okay, now can you also pull out of your head that wonderful quotation from the writings, "The purpose of religion is." How does it go?
You got me.
Ah, well, I'm gone too. Uh, but
I've studied the Bible for many, many more years than I have studied the Baha'i writings. They don't come quite as readily.
Big Hammer is correct. And the purpose of religion is actually to elevate the individual, to elevate society, and then to elevate global humanity. Absolutely. That is the purpose. The purpose of religion, in my opinion, is not form and ritual. Not at all. Religion works internally. In fact, in the
Well, and this is probably a good time to bring Dan Sanderson back in, who's been intently watching from the studio, but we do have the right to go a few extra minutes, so let's hear from Dan here as well.
Hello, Dan.
So as we start talking about the purpose of religion and how it shouldn't be form and ritual, but rather something more, I thought Dan might have some comments that he's been waiting to share with us. I don't know. He's on mute or otherwise
Yeah.
suffering from laryngitis.
No, but here I find the ritual fantastic. I mean, maybe there's two ways to look at it. People don't discount the rituals as unnecessary, but rituals are so powerful, and I think that they're part of the tradition. I think the rituals are quite fascinating and should be celebrated.
Well,
Um,
you've got a point there. I mean, in the Baha'i faith, one ritual which initially, well, I won't even go there, but I'll say that this ritual of circumambulation, this
Mhm.
ritual of walking around a thing, an object of adoration, I
Mhm.
find a deep, deep significance there, because it's the pattern of all creation, particles forming relationships with one another and then orbiting each other as they
Mhm.
become attracted to each other, and they show respect to that which they orbit around, the bob, being the primal point around whom all things revolve. These deep spiritual symbolism that is expressed in a ritual.
So, Eileen, you mentioned something about the personal experience, I would suppose. I mean, that just is just to get the conversation back into what you were saying about that. Because I've heard criticisms about don't demean it just to an individual relationship with a higher power. I mean, it's got to be part of it, but let's focus on what the how amazing that is, like how incredible that kind of spiritual connection can be. Can you take us down that road a little bit?
Are you talking about the inner life that evolves through prayer, meditation?
You know, I mean, here I kind of came in and jarred the conversation because you were making a point about it's not all ritual, and I think you were leading towards the spiritual, the inner sort of conversation
Yes.
that you have, the inner relationship that you have with a higher power. So I
Yes.
wanted to bring it back onto track because,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I'll tell a true story here that I think will illustrate, and this would not have happened, I am sure, if I hadn't been in a pursuing prayer and meditation for many years. My son died 5 years ago of cancer, and he was a very unhappy person when he was on earth. He had a lot of issues, and he was on disability. He didn't want to know anything about religion or the Baha'i faith. He just didn't want to move towards anything that was positive that could help him. Okay. About a year after he died, he came to me in a dream, which I would not have recognized if I hadn't been attuned to these experiences. And he was young, he was happy. He said, "Hi, Mom." And I saw that he was in what we might call a health club. And there were young military, he was ex-military, by the way, and there were young men and women doing the reps. But seated on the floor next to my right and to his right was a row of people, and they were sitting cross-legged on the floor, and their eyes were looking up just rapturously. They were listening and learning, and they were in rapture. And that said it all. That told me he's in a very good place now. He's listening and learning. And interestingly, he said, "Well, I'll see you again in a year, Mom." Okay, well, that was 4 years ago. Now, where he is, he has no idea what an Earth year is anymore. But it's that attunement that we had on a spiritual level, because of course I prayed for him every day after he died. While he was alive, the relationship just wasn't there. The love was, but not the relationship. So this is what can happen when you open up through prayer, and you pray for the deceased, and you pray for the people in this world. And my father is another person who comes back to me every so often. He's quite aware of the work that I'm doing, the path that I'm on, and he's very encouraging, although he didn't understand any of this when he was alive. So it's really for our own benefit to open up this line of communication with other realities. Never, 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 ever go to a psychic or whoever and have them tell you. That's dangerous. Don't get into that. But you work on it yourself. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does. Wade, do you have anything you'd like to add in there?
No, I'm just really enjoying the conversation and the personal sharing here. There are many stories. I've heard more of them because my wife tends to like to explore some of those avenues as well, and many stories of people who've had those experiences that come to light. I want to wrap up though by talking about the comments again and making sure that we fulfill our prophetic statement that one of your books is going to be given away free to the comment that you find the most interesting, intriguing. We've shared a number of them. We haven't shared all of them. We have here this one from Sharon Leinert and or Leinert, I'm not sure. And I think Sharon may have been the one who won a book last week, but by the time we announced it, maybe you were gone and we didn't know how to contact you. I think it was Sharon. I have to go look, but I don't know if you have a comment on what Sharon said here.
I would say that perhaps truth as a single point is a little simplistic. If I've learned anything from my studies of the Hebrew Bible and my studies of the Baha'i writings, is there are many different interpretations, 1,000 and more to a single word or verse. So it's not quite that simple. Okay, Fuad cannot see.
Well, I think let me add a comment to that too. I think you're right there. I think what she's getting at is that the ignorant multiply it is they try to cause false dichotomies
Well,
between different aspects of the truth.
That's true too. And it really irks me when people say, well, I have my own truth. Regardless of the reality around them.
Living in one's own private Idaho. Yeah, Fuad had a number of interesting comments. There was one here also by Big Hammer about the light and the particle. The flow of photons is a wave. I mentioned earlier the wave function collapsing. That might be what he was referring to.
I sure can't comment on anything that has to do with physics or Einstein. Sorry, I'm retreating from that.
Well, would you like me to add something in about quantum indeterminism, or do we want?
Absolutely, please do.
Well, Wade, I mean, I know that Eileen's kind of stepped back from the conversation about Einstein and physics. So let's maybe just throw this out and say, how crystal clear, or how clear is that guess that because there's determinacy at a quantum level that there's room for God, so to speak, right? I mean, I don't jump to that conclusion that he's putting.
Well, that there's indeterminism, and I'm not saying it's a conclusion. I'm saying it's an opening to look at it that way, in that we cannot until. So there was a physicist, a theoretical physicist. Her last name is Marco Polos. You may have heard me tell this story before. I think it was 2004 article in Scientific American. She was published having a mathematical proof that something did not exist until it was observed. And that led me into this quest, this search into that topic. That there is a part of creation where something is hidden, and once it's known, it becomes determined. But until it is observed, it is not determined. It has a rudimentary fractal of free will, if you will, in that we can't know what it will do. We can study the trajectory of a billiard ball and know exactly what's going to happen. The same with Newton understanding, the fall of an apple, right? In classical physics, you can map it out. You can put a man on the moon because you know exactly how a thing will behave. But at the quantum level, you don't know that. And in that, I see the opportunity for a divine being to say, I choose not to know what an individual will do. I choose to allow the freedom for this individual to spin to the left or spin to the right. And until that person discloses what they do, I will choose not to know, even though I am omniscient, the omniscient God. I will choose not to know the next comment that Dan is going to make until he makes it. I think I know. I think I can predict it, but I allow that Dan might surprise me this time.
I'm going to bring my comments going to actually bring Eileen back into the conversation a little bit here, because there is something ideal about having a higher power that has believers, or has made in the image of God, right? That has this autonomy to accept him, and that's quite a poetic. There's some circular beauty to that, right? I mean, you think about this, the strongest love that we can imagine. It's not just something that you command. You can't. It has to be, it has to be given. And I think that, there's just no way out of that law, even for a supreme deity, right? You just can't get out of that. What makes it pure? Well, it makes it pure that it can be given free of coercion, right? So what do you think, Wade? Was that out of left field?
Yes, it's absolutely. I mean, religion, as I've said, must inspire, never coerce.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and we used to in the Worldwide Church of God, back when we knew about 1844, but obviously Jesus hadn't returned. There were many other things that we sought to understand. And our distinction of the angels versus humans, because there are these biblical verses about man being created lower than the angels for now, but at a time in the future, we will be elevated above the angels, right? And in seeking to understand this in a physical way, it was simply the fact that the spirit world is kind of our caretaker. We were in this cocoon, this womb, this beautiful blue jewel floating through space, and we have these limited, fragile physical bodies. And the angels, of course, much more powerful and eternal, whereas we could die at the mere, breath from the nostrils of God. And but we were to be elevated based on the fact that we had free will, and we could build character, and we could change and evolve, and then we could ascend to our station based on the choices we would make in this life. So we were given this precious jewel of free will. And the point being, in answer to your question, you may think, what are you talking about, Wade? Well, what I'm talking about is that the angels were not given free will in that analogy. They are spiritual robots. They have instinct. they bow to God because they were created with that mechanism that causes them to bow to God. They circle his throne, they submit to him because that was the instinct. Birds fly in a certain direction, whales migrate in a certain way. Animals behave by instinct. They don't have a choice, they don't have free will. Angels, in that sense, we believe, did not have free will in the way that we have it. They were powerful, but they were constrained by God's command, whereas we have the right and the freedom to break it.
So
Of course, when we do, it breaks us. But we're given this cocoon in which we can play and experiment with that to our heart's content. And
Yes.
some will, become the incorrigible sinner and refuse to submit to God and shake their fist at him. Even in, there are analogies of that in the Bible. But
Mhm.
most of us will gradually come to know God as a loving Father who seeks the best for us, and we will willingly then submit.
I ran across a fascinating piece of information in the Baha'i writings recently. One definition of an angel is simply a person who has reached a high level of spiritual development. These are the angels. And when they pass on, they're also ones who are most likely to come back and help us. I know more than one person who has seen a person they were sure was an angel, and these were not gullible people. A lot of things happen that are beyond our comprehension, and at some point, faith has to click in. One thing I was told many, many years ago, if you don't understand it, don't argue. Just leave it be. And then a few years later, you come back, oh yeah, that's what that meant all this time. Yeah, sure, now I understand. So instead of railing,
Well, I'm laughing because I have a teenage daughter at home, and I'm reminded of the story about the teenage son who went to college and was amazed how much his dad had learned in the 4 years he was away.
oh yes, of
When he came
course, of course. Yeah, right. We all start off in many ways as a blank slate, and we play and throw things in our playpen, and we're pretty terrible little human beings. But we do grow up. And I think that's one of the blessings that I've received is living a long life in good health. It means I've been given much opportunity to learn and to change.
Well, Eileen, we're very grateful that you spent your time with us this evening sharing some of the things you've learned, especially about the prophecies of Daniel. I know we will have you back to talk more about this and unpack it at some point in the future. I don't know if you have picked a comment at all from amongst the ones that were shared.
Well, I think Big Hammer hit the hammer on the nail. I think religion is to teach people decent ways to treat their fellow humans. That is so true. That is exactly so true. And that was the gospel of Jesus.
Big Hammer, I'm putting in the chat right now. Send us an email, info@soupllc.com, to provide us with your address.
And happy reading.
Yeah. Happy reading, Big Hammer.
And Sharon, if you're still there, we will track you down somehow. We will get you the book that you won last week. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Tune in next week, where we will have Peter Merrick a fascinating individual who hails from Canada originally and is an incredibly prolific author with a huge following on LinkedIn. The question he will answer is he will talk about materialism, spirituality, and the soul. He will highlight the role of ethical and moral insights in society as a safeguard against materialism, and talk about how historical perspectives, or he will share his perspectives on how historical awareness and vigilance help preserve the intrinsic value of all human lives. You do not want to miss Peter Merrick next week. Eileen, thank you. We'll have you back. Everyone else, thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you back here. Same place, same time, every Tuesday evening.
Thank you all. Good night.
Goodbye.